Pacific blue wall is almost guaranteed to stay intact for the ninth consecutive cycle, with Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii all nearly certain to remain in the Democratic column. We also have Colorado, the fastest left-trending state in the nation, and Illinois. Up in the Northeast, Harris has a 97% chance in New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. Joe Biden carried each of those states by at least 15 percentage points in the 2020 cycle. Harris also has a 98% chance of carrying Maine's 1st congressional district, along with the District of Columbia, which doesn't even have a market because Democrats have never won it by less than 50 points. Over here on our electoral map, you see that all these solid blue states combine for 191 electoral votes. There is no realistic scenario in which Harris secures any less than this total come election night. On the other side, Donald Trump has his own set of safe states. He's virtually certain to win in North and South Dakota, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah. Nebraska's statewide election, as well as its 1st and 3rd districts, are safe Republican, as are Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina. Finally, we have Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia, all reliably in Trump's column. He carried each of his own safe states by at least 15 points in 2020 as well, and they combine for 122 electoral votes here. So Trump starts out with a disadvantage in the race to 270 electoral votes, down 191 to 122 from the solid states for each candidate. That leaves 225 votes still up for grabs in the 17 more competitive states, which are still shaded in gray. Now let's move on to the likely states, where each candidate has an 80 to 95% chance of winning. These states strongly favor one candidate, but still leave room for an upset. Starting with Harris, her running mate Tim Walz's home state of Minnesota is likely to stay blue for what would be a record-extending 13th consecutive election cycle. Joe Biden carried Minnesota by 7 points in 2020, and the markets currently give Harris a 91% chance of holding the state come November. At first glance, that might seem overly optimistic given the state of current polling. Harris leads by less than 5 points in an average of the last 4 polls, with margins ranging from +3 to +6. But as we get closer to Election Day, the fact that Trump has yet to poll within the margin of error against Harris does suggest it's not really in play. Personally, I'd probably still rate her chances closer to 75 to 80%, moving this closer to the lean category rather than a likely. Harris is also very likely to hold New Mexico, with its 5 electoral votes. Biden won New Mexico by 11 percentage points in 2020, and Harris is seen as the heavy favorite again, with a 91% chance of winning according to the latest odds. This feels more accurate, given that Harris leads by 8 points in the poll average, including a Harris +6 result from Republican-aligned Rasmussen reports. Back on our map, Harris is also favored to hold Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, where Democrats currently have an 89% chance of securing that single electoral vote. Again, despite Nebraska being a deep red state overall, Joe Biden flipped this Omaha-based district by 6.5 points in 2020, and it's rapidly trending left with a large proportion of college graduates. Harris is also likely to hold Virginia, with its 13 electoral votes. Virginia went for Biden by double digits in 2020, yet while he remained in the race, the polls showed Trump within striking distance and sometimes even leading Biden. Yet now, Harris has expanded the Democratic lead to its largest margin all cycle, 6.4% based on the last 5 polls. The betting markets, meanwhile, seem to reflect that positive trend for the VP as well, giving Democrats an 88% chance of holding Virginia as well. Finally, up in New England, both New Hampshire and the statewide race in Maine are also likely to go to Harris, at 85% and 88% respectively. These two tend to be the only semi-competitive races in this otherwise deep blue region, outside Pennsylvania, of course. But New Hampshire still went for Biden by 7 points in 2020 and Maine by 9. Polls indicate Harris will hold both for Democrats by similar margins this November. That wraps up the likely blue states. Now, as for the likely Trump states, let's start with Alaska. Trump is almost certain to win here, with a 92% chance according to the latest odds. Alaska has only gone blue once in its entire history as a state, though Trump's 10-point margin in 2020 was the narrowest for a Republican in 60 years. Turning to the Midwestern tandem of Iowa and Ohio, both are likely to stay in Trump's column. These states voted for Barack Obama in both 2008 and 2012, serving as key bellwethers during that time. However, they've swung hard to the right since then, with Trump winning both by at least 8 points in 2016 and 2020. Currently, Trump has a 93% chance of winning Iowa and a 93% chance of carrying Ohio, according to Polymarket's latest odds. Trump also has an 88% chance of winning Maine's 2nd Congressional District, a district he carried by 10 points in 2016 and by a narrower but still solid 7 points in 2020. This district is among the most rural and whitest in the country, both factors suggesting it could become even more favorable for Republicans in the future. Looking back at the map and moving down south to Florida, Trump is heavily favored to keep the Sunshine State in the Republican column for the 4th straight cycle. Florida, with its 30 electoral votes, the 3rd most in the nation, has long been a quintessential swing state, having been decided by less than 6 points in each of the last 8 cycles. However, it is now firmly leaning Republican after Trump expanded his margin of victory in 2020 compared to 2016. In the 2022 midterms, both Republican Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio were re-elected by more than 15 points each, signaling an even stronger shift to the right in the state's political landscape. Polymarket currently gives Trump a 91% chance of winning Florida, where he holds a 6-point lead in the Real Clear Politics polling average over the last 6 polls, including one survey from the New York Times and Siena College that showed him leading by as much as 14 points. Finally, let's take a look at Texas, the 2nd largest prize on the map, with 40 electoral votes. It is also likely to go to Trump. Joe Biden garnered 46.5% of the vote in Texas in 2020, the most for a Democrat since 1976. But despite the leftward trend in urban areas like Dallas and San Antonio, the heavily Hispanic and increasingly right-leaning Rio Grande Valley in South Texas has dampened Democratic hopes of flipping the state blue anytime soon. Polymarket gives Trump an identical 91% chance of winning Texas as in Florida, and the polling lead for Trump is almost identical as well. He leads Harris in Texas by 5.7% based on the last 6 polls. Together with the other likely states, Texas gives Trump a significant boost, bringing his electoral vote count to 219, just 7 shy of Harris, who stands at 226. That leaves 93 electoral votes remaining across the 7 core battleground states we've been discussing all cycle. These states were each decided by less than 3 points in 2020, and with the exceptions of Nevada, which voted blue twice, and North Carolina, which voted red in both elections, the other 5 states flipped from Trump in 2016 to Joe Biden in 2020. Now, in the 2024 cycle, neither Trump nor Harris have better than a 70% chance of winning any of the core battleground states. Our next rating classification is lean, which covers the 65% to 80% probability range. Only one state falls into this category, and that is Arizona, with 11 electoral votes. The odds currently favor Trump at 67%. These are the best odds Republicans have had since Biden exited the race. Remember, back in 2020, Arizona went blue for only the 2nd time in 70 years, driven by the rapid growth and diversification of Maricopa County, which includes the Phoenix metro area. However, it only voted for Biden by 0.3%, and Arizona remains a fundamentally Republican state, which is clearly reflected in these odds. While Democrats have won 5 consecutive statewide races for president, U.S. Senate, and governor, Trump is currently leading in the Real Clear Politics polling average by exactly 1 point based on the last 10 polls. Now, as for the remaining 6 states, let's go in order of least to most competitive. Georgia joins Arizona as a tilt state in the Trump column. Georgia was the closest state in the 2020 election, decided by a razor-thin 0.2% margin. Similar to Arizona, Its leftward shift has been driven by the rapid growth and diversification of its largest population center, Atlanta, where record turnout among black voters barely tipped the scales in Biden's favor. However, in 2024, Trump is now favored on Polymarket with a 64% chance of winning, just shy of lean territory. Again, these are his best odds since President Biden dropped out. Trump also holds a half-point lead here based on the last 9 polls. Back to the map, the next most likely state to go to either candidate is North Carolina, again, tilting toward former President Trump. His odds are sitting at 63% on Polymarket, which is narrower than both Georgia and Arizona, despite North Carolina voting more to the right in 2020. Interestingly, coming into that cycle, North Carolina was considered to the left of both, as it voted more to the left in the previous 3 cycles. However, North Carolina hasn't elected a Democrat to federal office since Barack Obama won it in 2008. He failed to hold it against Mitt Romney in 2012, and each of the last 8 presidential and Senate races in the state have been decided by less than 6 points, cementing North Carolina as a consistently competitive but Republican-leaning state. The Real Clear Politics polling average has Trump leading by half a point based on the last 11 polls. Harris hasn't led in a single survey since mid-September. 4 states remain, and Trump could reach 270 electoral votes with a win in any one of the core Upper Rust Belt trio: Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Now these 3 states, each of which voted Democrat in every election from 1992 to 2016, flipped to Trump in 2016 by less than a point each. Biden returned them to the blue column in 2020, and that was pivotal. If Trump had held just one of these 3 states in 2020, he would still be serving a second term right now. Here in 2024, they may prove decisive once again. Kamala Harris needs to hold all 3 to reach exactly 270 electoral votes, while Trump just needs to crack the wall in any one of these states. On Polymarket, Trump is narrowly favored in all 3 of the key Rust Belt battleground states. He's given a 52% chance of winning in both Wisconsin and Michigan, just slightly better than a coin flip, and a 55% chance in Pennsylvania. Comparing this to the latest poll averages, in Pennsylvania, Trump holds a razor-thin lead of 0.1% based on the last 11 polls. Of those, 6 show Trump ahead, 3 have Harris in front, and 2 show them exactly tied. If we look at the timeline graph, this marks the longest stretch that Trump has led Harris since late August. While the lead is minimal, it demonstrates a slight momentum shift in Trump's favor in this critical battleground state as we approach Election Day. Meanwhile, in Michigan, Trump actually leads by a greater margin of 0.9% based on the last 10 surveys. Again, Trump has led in 6, Harris in 3, and 1 tied. Again, this is a concerning trend for the Harris campaign, as she had previously led Trump by at least a point or 2 since late July. The reason why Trump's odds are still lower here than in Pennsylvania on Polymarket is that Michigan is a fundamentally bluer state. It voted to the left of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania in both 2016 and 2020. Finally, looking at Wisconsin, the Real Clear Politics polling average shows Harris holding a very narrow lead of just 0.3% over 9 polls, with the last 3 conducted by highly regarded pollsters showing an exact tie. Harris's lead has steadily narrowed over the past couple of weeks. While Michigan is generally seen as the most fundamentally Democratic of the 3 Rust Belt states, Wisconsin leans more Republican. It voted to the right of both Michigan and Pennsylvania in the last 2 election cycles. Wisconsin's demographics, being whiter, more rural, and having a lower share of college-educated residents, tend to favor Republicans. If Trump is to overperform among the white working class, as he did in 2016, Wisconsin would likely be the front line for that. Notably, Trump overperformed the final polling averages here by more than 6.5 points in both 2016 and 2020. Meanwhile, Pennsylvania is widely regarded as the most likely tipping point state on the electoral map. Nate Silver gives it a 33% chance of tipping the election, almost double the next most likely state, Michigan. If Trump wins Pennsylvania, as he does on this map, it's highly likely he will reach 270 electoral votes. For Harris, losing Pennsylvania would make her path much more difficult. She'd not only need to win every remaining battleground state, but also flip one of the states that currently lean toward Trump. Yet, based on the latest prediction market odds, Trump is narrowly favored in both Michigan and Wisconsin, which would lift him up to 306 electoral votes, now well past the threshold of 270 needed to secure him a second non-consecutive term. As for the final state on our map, Nevada, with its 6 electoral votes, Harris is slightly favored on Polymarket with a 51% chance of winning. Joe Biden carried Nevada by 2.4% in 2020, which was the same margin Hillary Clinton won by in 2016, despite a more favorable national environment for Democrats in 2020. A win in Nevada would bring Harris's total up to 232 electoral votes, still leaving her short of Trump's projected 306 electoral votes, securing him a second non-consecutive term.